initially in 1981, people were telling me, oh, I love Lovecraft. I finally found a game that has it. But now it's always, I started reading Lovecraft because of you. That made me happy. And at id, I was there on the first Doom. I did 20 of the 27 levels. And I'm guessing that the people that were complaining were not people that played it. Like the Christians who condemned Doom because it was so satanic. It's like, have you played the game? The demons aren't good guys. They're purely bad. Call of Cthulhu is so apolitical. Everyone's got to agree that giant monsters destroying the human race is bad, right? We don't have to argue whether orcs are Mexicans or not, or who has dark vision, because if someone in Call of Cthulhu has dark vision, it's because he's secretly a monster and he's got to be stopped. Call of Cthulhu is all played straight. It's this creepy monster stuff, but people playing it are having a great time. My signature move in Doom was you walk into a room, it'd be empty, and there was a pedestal, and on top of it was like the BFG or some super awesome thing, and then you look at it and it's like, I know if I go pick that up, all hell's gonna break loose. But of course you can't stop yourself. You have to go take it.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. I'm your host, Pete Pischke, and today's guest is a true RPG legend. He's the creator of the horror tabletop game Call of Cthulhu, a foundational designer on Doom and Quake at id Software, and a major developer on Age of Empires, one of the most iconic RTS series ever. So, if you've ever rolled dice in the dark or fought cyber demons with a double-barrel shotgun, chances are you've felt his influence. So, today we are going to dive into the legacy of the one and only Sandy Petersen, game designer, Lovecraftian scholar, and founder of Petersen Games, to talk about his life, the creation of his groundbreaking games, his ongoing love affair with the dark mythos of one H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome to the show, Sandy.
Howdy, I'm happy to be here.
I'm super stoked for this. I'm a big HP guy. I've known about Call of Cthulhu forever. You like many people, you were the one that kind of turned me on to getting into HP Lovecraft and reading.
I keep that a lot. I'm very proud of it actually, because in 1980, when I started working on the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, every single person I knew who had heard of Lovecraft had heard of him because I had told them. I mean, I knew there was logically other people in the world that knew about Lovecraft, but I'd never met one that came with independently. And so I had expected the game would be that Call of Cthulhu, my first full game. I'd done some expansions before then, that it would have sales of, it would sell out to like the few Lovecraft fans around the world and then vanish. But I have done a game about my favorite author, and that'd be cool. And instead it sort of took fire and people started reading Lovecraft because of Call of Cthulhu, and that kind of seeped through nerd culture and became this. I mean, it's still around. How many games from 1980 are still around, you know?
No, and now H.P. Lovecraft, his ideas are just everywhere.
Oh yeah, I know. Every time my wife and I go to a store and there's like we see a Cthulhu doll or plushie or hat or something. She's like, "Look, Sandy, that's because of you." And there was actually I got an award for it actually, which I don't know if I have it here. No, well, it's packed away, I guess. But so you can see some of the plushies and stuff back here. But I got an award from the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival for like greatness in Lovecraft or something. I can't remember. It's a little statue of Lovecraft. And the first two they gave to me and Sam Raimi. Sorry, not Sam Raimi, Stuart Gordon. And the argument was that in 1981, Call of Cthulhu comes out and it starts seeping through the role-playing gaming culture. And even people that didn't play Call of Cthulhu knew about it, right? It was well known. And then in 1985, Stuart Gordon releases Reanimator, and this starts going through the film geek culture, right? So these two directions is seeping through the collective nerd, culture and social things, and that's what made Lovecraft famous. And so I got one of the awards, and Stuart Gordon got the other. But my game came out before Reanimator, so there's that. Not saying I'm more important, just I did it first.
I don't know Reanimator as well. I do know Call of Cthulhu, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, Stuart Gordon did Reanimator. He did From Beyond. His producer worked on Dagon. They did a number of Lovecraftian movies, but none of them were Cthulhu. So I think the fact that Cthulhu is the famous one is kind of down to me, but it's not a contest, right? I'm glad that I loved Stuart Gordon's movies, and I'm glad he did them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm disabled, and sometimes I have other members with health issues, and sometimes sometimes people feel like it's a competition, and so I joke, it's not a competition. However,
Yeah,
if it was one, I'd win.
yeah. But I do hear a lot people tell me, "Hey, I started reading Lovecraft because of your game." Initially in 1981, people were telling me, "Oh, I love Lovecraft. I finally found a game that has it." But now it's always, "I started reading Lovecraft because of you." So that made me happy that Lovecraft is well known, and also he was not well um, considered back in 1981. He was one of those authors that, kind of like the Book of Mormon, you don't have to read to have a low opinion of. Um, so that was a Lovecraft situation.
That's a good jumping off point, because you being one of the founding creators of Doom might surprise some people. When we learned this last year from David Jaffe, who brought this up. He said, "Oh yeah, did you know there was this guy who is Mormon who helped make Doom?" And I was like, "Oh really? I didn't know that." That's kind of what put you on my radar. How do you go from guy who went to BYU for zoology of all things to ending up as a game designer?
Okay, so if you want to do the whole life story thing, I'll summarize the best I can. I start out as this kid who loves games and who at the age of 8 found an old book of Lovecraft from 1942 in my dad's box. My dad's been a science fiction fan for forever. He's got old Galaxy magazines and things, and
Cool.
science fiction from the old pulps, right? So we also had this one Lovecraft book which I read, never read anything like it, and I was one of those annoying geeky kids that no one likes, that was kind of precocious and didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, I had friends, but not a lot of friends. And so I read Moby Dick when I was 11, that kind of stuff, right? I'm not saying I fully appreciated it, but I read Lovecraft and was into it. And then I got into board war games, like Avalon Hill games and other games like this. Started making my own games, and also loving Lovecraft. 1974, D&D comes out, and my friends get me to start playing that. So I'm playing role-playing games, and other role-playing games come around that. Then I developed my own role-playing game, which is a horror game in the modern age, with Lovecraft elements. So it's not fully Lovecraftian. At this point, I started contacting a friend of mine, got me to write to and contact Greg Stafford, owner of Chaosium, because I was playing his game RuneQuest a lot. And I did a couple little expansions. One of them was called Gateway Bestiary, and it was a bestiary of monsters for RuneQuest. And as far as I know, it's the first time that Lovecraft monsters ever appeared in print in a game, because I had a section of Lovecraft monsters. So you could have a Shoggoth or something fight your fantasy guy in RuneQuest. In 1980, I managed to get the assignment of doing a Lovecraft game, which originally was going to call Dark Worlds, but it became Call of Cthulhu. And I didn't use the system I had used for my own personal horror game, because they wanted me to use the basic role playing system, which actually was a lot better than the system I had. So I was cool with that. I did that, and then after that was published, I moved to California to go to graduate school, studying zoology, and then gradually my avocation became my vocation. I dropped out of graduate school, started doing gaming full time. I had a part-time job at Chaosium. Actually, initially was typesetting the stuff, but I'd also edit it as a typeset. Then I started developing. Then I became like their main designer, and I stayed there till 1988, when I realized that there was almost the money was not there for Chaosium. It was not an awesome business company. I mean, their business decisions were made from sitting in the warehouse smoking like dope, and I would be there with them. They'd be passing around a big old hooter, and I wouldn't smoke it because I was I'm a good LDS guy, but they would always hand it to me politely. I'd pass it on. I probably got lots of secondhand smoke, but I wasn't actually inhaling the thing. And but based on that is how they made business decisions, you can see why maybe not everything went super well for them. So I left and I went to Microprose software in Maryland, where I was recruited at a Gen Con by other guys that had worked for TSR and other game companies, and they were looking for designers like me to join them. So they got me, and I worked on a bunch of things there. The most notable one is I was one of the developers, not one of the top ones, but one of the developers on the first Civilization. So that's, kind of cool.
That is cool.
And then from there, when the owner of Microprose went crazy and started doing literally crazy things, then his company started to fall apart, and I left and I went to id Software with a mutual friend that knew them. They were looking for a designer. And then at id, I was there on the first Doom game with them. I did 20 of the 27 levels. Or at least re-edited some of them. Some of them have been done by Tom Hall, and then I had to redo them.
Yeah, no, let me interject there. So I think I was listening to different interviews said, and it was either I can't remember if it was Romero or was Carmack that actually did the job interview with you.
They all did the job. Romero and Carmack and Adrian, they all interviewed me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what had actually happened is that they decided that Tom Hall, their previous designer, whom I like and is that they thought his design style, though it was great for Wolfenstein and Commander Keen, he wasn't right for Doom, and they wanted to get someone new. Okay, and Romero and John Carmack wanted to get an artist to do the levels because it takes, you have to do a 3D level. And the artist said no. Basically, the two Johns had decided that designers are bad, we shouldn't have them. And the artist said, no, designers are good, we just didn't have the right designer. So they looked at my resume and they said, if anyone's a designer, it's got to be Sandy Petersen. So let's give him a test. So I came in not knowing that the artists were rooting for me and the programmers were rooting against me. Okay. And so I get in there and they say, make a level. So I said, okay. So they showed me they showed me one of the previous artists had done. He basically made a spiral staircase, except in Doom you can't make a real spiral staircase because it's only like 2.5D, not 3D, right? So it was part way around. And so, but when I did a level, it's level E2M6 of Doom, and there's a you start off and there's a room with the floor that falls away into acid, and then there's traps, and there's a monster behind it, hidden door, and there's all these things that happen that are like a level. And because I was basing it on old role play and stuff and things like that. And it probably doesn't look as good as what the artist had done, but it was playable. There was fun things. And so the two Johns changed their tune and said, yes, this is the kind of guy we need. He's doing it right. So yay, I got the job. And I actually got the job without knowing that I was there to replace Tom Hall. And I worked alongside Tom Hall for a month before he left. And then I found out that was so if I'd known, it would have been kind of awkward probably, but I didn't know. Yeah. So I just butted around with Tom like everyone else. I did most of the levels for Doom. I did most of the levels for Doom 2. I did 17 out of 32 for Doom 2. And then on Quake, we had 4 designers that each did one chapter, and I did the last chapter. And then after that, I left id and went to Ensemble Studios, and I got the job there because Bruce Shelley, one of their he's a designer. He didn't really do much design for Ensemble. He was mostly a frontman, which he did a great job as. And I knew him from my days at Microprose. We were both designers there, and so I got the job at Ensemble Studios. So I didn't do much on Age 1, but I was the lead designer on Rise of Rome, and then I was one of the designers on Age 2, and then I was the lead on The Conquerors. Then I was on Age 3. Then I was the lead. Basically, I got to be the lead of the expansions because I'd be doing an expansion as the lead designer, and while I was doing that, somebody would be doing the main game. Yeah. And then I'd join on when I finished my expansion, but I can't displace that guy. He's already been doing it. So I was never the lead on one of the main things, but I was valued. Uh,
You were the go-to history guy, right?
I was the history guy. Whenever they wanted to know something about history, they would come to me and say, "Sandy, what's a cool name for a Russian elite unit?" And I would come up with something, explain things away. And I did all the balancing um, from age 2 on of the units based on actual history books I read, like Archer Jones's Art of War in the Western World. Uh, Things like that, where I learned that the basic way that tactics worked up until gunpowder is troops with bows defeat troops without bows, because the troops, even though their troops with bows are faster, they can retreat and shoot. If they're pinned against the wall or something, the other guys can get them, right? But normally they just like to shoot. Similarly, cavalry, however, can defeat troops with bows or other missile weapons, because the troops with bows, they're lighter armored, they don't have any close combat skills, and so you can run them down with your cavalry. But the cavalry can't beat the heavy infantry with spears and swords, because they're too dense, they're armored, they outnumber you. So cavalry defeats the foot archers defeat the heavy infantry defeats the cavalry. And then you have horse archers who kind of come in, and they will defeat the heavy cavalry, but they lose to the foot archers, because the foot archers usually have heavier weapons, they can shoot further. It's this whole thing. On the other hand, the heavy infantry can't run down the cavalry to get them, so cavalry can pick when they want. Anyway, all this stuff turned out to make for a really interesting game when you use it properly. So that's what we did.
One of the fun stories I was reading about your time working on Age of Empires is that you guys kept getting pulled into the news around world events. I'm sure. So the stuff was going on at the time with Macedonia becoming a nation.
Oh my gosh, that was so crazy. Yeah. So I'm doing Rise of Rome. I said, hey, let's do an expansion for Age of Empires. What happened is I was working on this game called Sorceress, which was going to be this full fantasy RTS, and they kept pulling team members off it to work on Age 2. And they finally pulled so many guys off, it was like me, a programmer, and an artist. And I said, I can't do a game with 3 guys. I said, tell you what, how about if I do an expansion for Age of Empires? We'll call it The Rise of Rome. It'll have 4 civilizations. We'll have Rome and 3 of their enemies. And Ensemble said, do you think it'll sell? I said, I'm pretty sure it'll sell based on my experience in Call of Cthulhu, where the expansions outsell the main game. I mean, each individual expansion only sells about 1/3 as much as the main game, but you add them together and they're selling a lot more. Also, it's a lot cheaper to make. Something that sells 1/3 as many is like a really good deal for something that costs like a 20th as much, right? So Microsoft tried to shout us down and not do it. We don't think expansions will sell, but we did it anyway. And so we're doing it. And one of the enemies I wanted to have be the Pyrrhus of Epirus, and basically the descendants of the Macedonians in the Balkans. Okay. So I wasn't sure what to call them. So I call them the Hellenes. They're not Greeks really. So I call them the Macedonians. And at the time, Greek people were having this huge problem with Macedonia, because they had a province called Macedonia, and they didn't want the evil Macedonian country to be claiming their province, which the Macedonians weren't. The Macedonians are like the poorest country in Europe. They weren't causing trouble with anybody, but the Greeks were like all up in there. I mean, when I went during this time period, I went to Washington, D.C., and there was like 60,000 Greeks marching and screaming about how Alexander the Great was Greek, which the Greeks at the time would not have agreed, right? But now he is, because he's cool. So anyway, so they said, you can't have the Macedonians be separate from the Greeks, because Macedonia is Greek. And I said, well, here's my logic. If Macedonians are Greek, then that means you get 2 Greek civs in the game. Isn't that awesome? But it wasn't, apparently. So, but then what happened is that Greece decided to ban all video games. They did this because they were trying to stop gambling games. And they did it so ham-handedly that the law effectively banned all video games. So then we didn't have to worry about the Greeks at all. They're going to buy 0 of our games, so who cares?
Well, that was convenience.
It was kind of convenient, yeah. But this isn't. But this isn't the last time something like this. Well. So fast forward to we're doing the Conquerors for Age 2. Okay, so I wanted to have 4 awesome conquering civs. I couldn't. It was harder to get a theme like a Rise of Rome for the end of the Middle Ages. I said we'll do conquer. So we did the Huns, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Spanish. And the Mayans maybe aren't conquerors, but we got to have someone for the Aztecs to conquer. Plus they were a fun civ to make. And then so we get it all done. We're ready to go. It's 5 weeks before the game's supposed to come out. And Microsoft, by this time, by the way, they were 100% behind doing the expansions. They completely switched their position because Rise of Rome did so great. It sold well. And then when they re-released the gold box of it, they noticed that when they released Rise of Rome, it increased sales of the core game, which was even better for them. And then they did a gold box, which was Age of Empires plus the Rise of Rome, and that yet sold even more. So they say, we learned that expansions are really great. We said, yeah, who taught you? But anyway, so I do Rise of Rome. They call us and they say, you need to put the Koreans in the Conquerors. And I said, the Koreans are awesome, and to their great credit, they were not conquerors. It was like they just stayed in Korea and didn't conquer anyone. And they said, yes, but StarCraft sold 3 million copies in Korea. And here was my counter argument. I said, there are no Koreans in StarCraft, so that's not why it sold. I thought that was a solid argument. But then they said, but it sold 3 million copies. And I realized when someone repeats the same argument, it means they're not subject to any kind of convincing, right? So I said, fine. So plus I wasn't that hard to convince because the Koreans would be cool to have in the game. So we did the Koreans. And then we got in big trouble because the Koreans got all picky about, why did you call the ocean the Sea of Japan instead of the Sea of Korea? And we were like, because every country in the world calls it the Sea of Japan, except apparently Korea, And they said, why do you have the turtle ship look wrong? We said, we used the pictures we had, but they apparently had different pictures anyway. And there was a lot of little political stuff that was drama about that, but it didn't make me not love Koreans. It just made me not like political drama.
It's cool though the game became popular enough that all these people cared.
Yes, that is cool. And I'm guessing that the people that were complaining were not people that played it. They just had heard about it and complained. That's often the case. Like the Christians who condemned, and even LDS people that condemned Doom because it was so satanic. It's like, have you played the game? It's like, yes, there's satanic imagery on the wall because you're in hell. It's like hell's decorator. The demons aren't good guys. You can't be one. You can't ally with them. They're purely bad.
Yeah. You're annihilating the demons. You're eradicating.
Yeah. There was one claim. I did get the privilege of having a Tipper Gore and the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2000.
I'm gonna embarrass myself. I cannot think of it.
I can't believe I can't remember.
Lieberman?
Yeah, Joe Lieberman.
I don't know how I knew that.
I'm sorry I forgot, but it's been 25 years. So both of them held up copies of Doom and condemned it in Congress. So that was exciting. To be condemned. And then they said things like, it teaches you how to be a school shooter. I was like, what? See, in Doom, they say the right way to do the most school shootings you can is to shoot a guy, then before seeing what happens, go to the next guy and shoot him. And I'm like, that's not what Doom teaches you. Doom teaches you to hose the guy down until he drops, then go to the next guy. It's completely the opposite of what they were saying because they didn't know what Doom was like. So, but in any case, and then they're like, well, this guy played Doom and then he killed someone. And I couldn't help remember Alfred Hitchcock's comment when someone said, what do you say about this person that is a 6-time murderer that before his 6th murder, he went and watched Psycho? And Hitchcock said, I wonder what movie he watched the first 5 times. And I was like, they're going to play some game. Doom is popular. It's obviously some of them are going to play Doom before they do something crazy. It doesn't mean Doom made them do it.
That is how, I've seen some of that moral panic stuff come back in the last few years, worryingly.
Yeah, but and the funny thing is, most of the moral panic was, I would expect it to come from the right, and most of it came from the left. Like I said, Tipper Gore and Joe Lieberman are the ones condemning it. So the right wing kind of made noises about it being satanic, but didn't actually try to ban it. Now it was the right that was trying to ban role playing games with the Mothers Against or Bothered by D&D.
Yeah, the satanic
But
panic,
they were so ignorant they barely knew Call of Cthulhu existed. So I mostly got it flew under the radar there.
Well, you see, according to H.P. Lovecraft, his evil creature from the beyond is actually older than Satan. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of
fantastic argument. Would have gone real well.
well, the funny thing is that there's actually quite a bit of research into teen suicide, and of course, it's tragic, and it's not as common as like old guy like me suicide. But people don't. If someone like me kills themselves, like everyone, no one's like surprised and horrified. They go, well, "Yeah, you can tell his
True.
marriage was. You can tell why they did it." But a kid, like, why would they do it? But the reasons they do it in the analysis is, they don't have any friends. They have poor problem solving skills because like why suicide problem, and they don't have a lot of imagination. These are the three characteristics that are fairly common among teen suicides. But if you play D&D or Call of Cthulhu, you automatically get friends. Everyone's accepted in the party. You got friends, okay? It expands your imagination hugely. So you get that imagination, and every game is problem solving. So all the things that are characteristics of teen suicides are things that role-playing games help cure. So in fact, you would think logically they would be less likely to commit suicide, and in fact, that's the case if you look at the stats. If you play role-playing games, you're much less likely to hurt yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, Call of Cthulhu in particular, it's a very popular game. I think certain regions it's #1. Places like Spain, I think
it is #1 in Spain, in Japan, and in China.
Oh, China too. I didn't know that.
Well, it's not very big in China because they don't play a lot of role-playing games. So being big in China isn't as cool, but it is, So in Japan, it got that place honestly, because I think the Japanese didn't really get the Western stuff with the knights in armor and the sorcerers. That wasn't their tradition, but scary monsters, make sense. And also, scary monsters appeal to girls too. Whereas, well, here's the thing about Call of Cthulhu that made it unique. You played D&D.
Yep.
So you know the cycle of D&D. Go kill bad guys, get better from treasure and leveling up, go kill a bigger bad guy, level up, kill a bigger, and that's the cycle, right? It's a compelling cycle. Nothing wrong with that cycle. This is not what happens in Call of Cthulhu. You go in Call of Cthulhu, and the big treasure is going to be a moldy old book that drives you crazy looking at the pictures. You get worse over time instead of better because you start losing your grip on reality. You get cursed. You're not trying to go into combat. You're trying to avoid combat because the weakest enemy in the game is a cultist, and he's just as good as you, but probably more ruthless and better organized. So it's like the big combat scene is you running down a hall with a monster chasing you, and the climactic boss battle might be filling up the old well with concrete so it can't get out again, right? So it's a completely contrarian game, okay? It's the most contrarian role-playing game out there. Because I was trying to mimic Lovecraft. But the thing is that if you're a girl, the testosterone, kill monsters, get better, do things, that has some appeal, but it's not necessarily what all women like, right? But scary things, a lot of women like horror movies, okay? And it'll appeal to them. And Japanese women do as well. They have a long horror tradition. And so one of the results of this is that in Japan, 70% of the people playing Call of Cthulhu are women.
That's really interesting.
And it sells really well there, as in there's more copies of it sold in Japan than the rest of the world combined. And it's not obscure in the rest of the world. So it's doing really well in Japan, which means the average player of my game is an 18 to 35-year-old Japanese woman.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
That's
Even
nuts.
in America, though, you see a group of guys playing Call of Cthulhu or D&D, you'll see like the D&D guys is 90% dudes, then like the token girlfriend or wife here and there. Call of Cthulhu is usually 25, 30% women. I think it's not 70% like in Japan because to play Call of Cthulhu in America, you have to pass through the filter of having played D&D first, before you go into Call of Cthulhu. But you don't have to do that in Japan, so they just play it. In Spain, I think we won out because TSR really screwed the pooch on their first version of D&D. They did a really terrible job of promoting it, and they did a really bad translation. So we kind of by default we became first place. So yay! And I'm saying all this despite the fact I get no royalties from Call of Cthulhu anymore, and I'm not regretting that. I made a deal with Chaosium, and I'm happy with the deal I made. Don't need the royalties, but just so you know, I'm not just doing it to like get more money. I mean, I want more money, but not from that.
That's a rare attitude these days.
Like I said, they paid me off, you know? And if you want to give me money, you can tell your fans this. I have a Patreon. It's called Sandy of Cthulhu. And every week I do an essay, usually about gaming or monsters. And then every month I give you a stats for a monster for a game. Like just this month, I gave stats for the Yadithians and Lovecraft's story, Through the Gates of the Silver Key, to be used. They're techno-magical sorcerers from a destroyed planet. I give stats for them to use in Call of Cthulhu and in D&D 5e. Okay, and then if you're at the highest tier, I also give you an STL to print out. You can make your own figure of it.
Did the TSR scandal and just the mishandling of that by WotC, did that open up more players to have interest in Call of Cthulhu?
I think so. People got so mad at WotC that they were looking for something else. And while some of the guys at Chaosium are woke-ish, not fully woke, but you know they're left wing. They're smart enough not to flaunt it like WotC did. So like, and plus people know that I am more conservative socially. So you know. So kind of if they don't like me, they can go with the other guys at TSR at Chaosium, and if they do like me, they can kind of ignore the other guys. So either way, we got you covered at Chaosium. Plus, Call of Cthulhu is so apolitical. Everyone's got to agree that giant monsters destroying the human race is bad, right? So
yeah, well, we'd hope so. We'd hope so. These days, I don't know.
We don't have to argue whether orcs are Mexicans or not, or who has dark vision, because if someone in Call of Cthulhu has dark vision, it's because he's secretly a monster and he's got to be stopped.
That checks out. Yeah. I just circling a bit back to the Ensemble days. It was so confusing. I remember as a player, my especially one of my uncles and my grandpa, they loved Age of Empires, especially Age of Empires 2. My grandpa's favorite was Korea.
Well, I'm saying I gave Korea my all, but it was the very last civ to make.
Because it felt like this series was doing really well. There's Age of Mythology, and then all of a sudden Microsoft pulls the plug on all of it, and that was so confusing from the consumer.
Oh yeah, okay. So here's the story behind that. Okay, this is a great story, in my opinion. So our plan was we were working on Halo Wars, which got delayed for reasons that I won't go into here, but I wasn't on Halo Wars, though I did some of the balancing for it. So what happened, everyone else was going to work on this game codenamed Titan. And what it was a massively multiplayer online game, which was going to be based in the Halo universe. Except in the past, before the Halos went, you know the Halo backstory at all?
I've, at least for the first 3 Halo games, I've kind of fallen off after that.
Okay, so you know that the Halos went off like tens of thousands of years ago and killed all sentient life.
Mm-hmm.
So this is before the Halos went off. So you are playing the Forerunners.
That's cool.
And the ancestors of the Covenant and the Floods there too, because that's what the Halos went off to kill. So we had this big science fiction MMO based in the Halo license, and we were experienced guys. We knew a lot about doing MMOs. We'd played them extensively. We were really good. I mean, you've played Age of Empires 3 and 2. You know, we know what we're doing, right?
Yes.
So we kept making estimates of how much money this would make. And our lowest estimate, even with Microsoft looking at it very carefully, was it would give $1.1 billion of profit to Microsoft. Okay, so it was going to be huge, and it would take 3.5 years to do. And I was the lore guy. I was going to do all the background lore for all the worlds and the races and stuff. So, you know, yay me. So I was sitting pretty. I was going to do this. So then Microsoft hires Don Matrick from EA. He was the hatchet man at EA. And Don Matrick's deal is that he has to make Microsoft Game Studios profitable in 3 years, and then he gets a giant bonus. Okay? So he's looking around to see what to do. And here's Ensemble Studio, which never sells less than 3 million copies of a game. So we're super, super profitable. But we're also expensive to keep going. But worse, our game isn't going to come out for 3.5 years. And in 3 years, the world ends for him. So if he got Halo Wars out and then fired our asses, he would he would get to save all that money to make it likely he'd make a profit in the 3 years. And the hell with the Microsoft shareholders. So getting rid of us was his idea. To increase his personal profits. I don't think it did Microsoft shareholders justice, because they would have made $1 billion off Titan, But it may have helped. But I gotta say that when he got sacked after the Xbox Live fiasco, I was kind of happy. We found out what they were doing before they did it. Actually, our bosses did. They found out that there was things weird, so they went out to Microsoft headquarters to ask around, and Microsoft's too big to keep a secret, right? They can't keep a secret, so they found out, and then the Microsoft guy said, "Wait, don't tell the workers that we're going to fire them all, and then you can keep your jobs with Microsoft." And to a man, our bosses resigned on the spot.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So they were stand-up guys. Ensemble was a tight company. And then they said, "No, don't resign. We'll lose Halo Wars." They knew that was going to be millions of dollars, like many millions of dollars, which it was. It sold 2.5 million copies. So at $40 each, you can, guess. So they said, so they basically started negotiating, and negotiations ended up with a third of the company was going on to form Robot Entertainment, which had a 3.5-year contract with Microsoft to do games for them. And they did the Hero Academy and Orcs Must Die and kind of went on. Then the other 2/3 of us would get a huge a firing bonus, basically. And the thing that was cool is the bosses, who were all going to stay on with Robot, they ensured that the people who weren't going to stay with Robot got twice as big a bonus leaving the company as the guys they were going to stay with, to make sure that we were taken care of. So Ensemble was
nice.
Cool guys. And the thing is, getting rid of us all, it didn't kill us, right? We just went on and we fertilized it. We formed Boss Fight Entertainment. I formed Petersen Games. One of the guys went out and he formed the company that did Words with Friends. The friend of mine, Paul Bettner, and they went to other companies too, Blizzard and other places. So the whole industry was like refreshed by the Ensemble Studios guys. And but I still think Microsoft took it in the shorts for that.
Yeah, but for people who like Age of Empires,
well, that's the thing. My favorite thing, there was a bunch of there was YouTube videos and stuff mourning our passing, and my favorite one was this video about 8 minutes long about how great Ensemble was, showing videos and talking about it. Then the final scene was this touching scene of a bunch of hussars murdering villagers and burning down houses. It's like, that's what Age of Empires is about.
What's the people in charge of the franchise now? It's like World's Edge or something?
There is a guy who used to work for us, Mark Toronto. He was one of the designers of Age 2, and he is still, I think, at Microsoft, but I don't know if he's in charge of that franchise. I mean, it's still really hard. I mean, this is what happens when a company owns a franchise instead of the publisher instead of the company, that eventually they can take it and give it to someone else. And if the new people don't appreciate the franchise, then it can kill it. That's what happened to Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. They took it from the original owners who loved it, gave it to someone new to save money or something, and then they just destroyed it. I don't think that's happened with Age, so the guys they gave it to must have actually cared. So like Age 2 and Age 4 seem to be okay. I have noticed that Age mythology is kind of the redheaded stepchild, though. I haven't done much with that.
They had some plans to expand out some of the older games, even for Age 3, but they end of last year they canceled a lot.
Well, our original plan was we were going to go, our next game after Age 3 was going to be start with the American Civil War, and go up to World War I or II, and then after that, then eventually you get up into the future. At least that was our plan. But of course that never came to be because we all went away and did other things.
Yeah, different dimension, different timeline.
And that wouldn't have been for a long time, because first we would have done Titan. We'd all be playing this giant MMO in space.
That then brought you back into doing tabletop design.
Yes. Well, what happened is after I was kicked out of Ensemble with everyone else, I went to SMU, Southern Methodist University, where I taught game development for 2 years to students learning how to do video games. and they had a whole program for it. Very intense program. It was so intense that people actually lost their marriages over it sometimes, which I did not approve of. But hey, it is what it is. And but they learned to work. Unlike most game development classes at universities, these guys had to work in teams with like a producer, artist, program, everything. So they had to learn how to work together, which is, and they came out of the program with some actual games they'd done. Little games, but games nonetheless. They had a great portfolio, and all the teachers were former game industry pros. And not to tout my own greatness, but I was one of the foremost guys they had, right? So anyway, I taught game design for 2 years. So you could have taken the class and making levels and stuff from Sandy Petersen for 2 years. Then I left academia, and I got a job offer from India to go there and make iPhone games. Okay. And it was a really good offer. I would be in Hyderabad, I think, or somewhere like that. And they would give me my own apartment, my own driver, because they said a white man should not drive in Hyderabad. I was going to get a little share of the company, 6% or something. That's nice. 6-digit salary, and stay there for a year and maybe more if I wanted. And my wife and I love Indian food. I like the Indian. And the thing about the Indian people I've worked with, the Indian developers, are that they're really smart, they're really hardworking, and at least the ones that go, the ones that I meet at the guild hall were almost all programmers, and they weren't super creative. And I know Indians can be creative. Obviously, look at their movies, right? But something in the way they teach their programmers, they drum that out of them a little bit, but they're so smart, they recognize that fact. And so they wanted me to come and teach them how to be creative and be fun. So that, what a fun job that is. To work with an ethnic group that I love, that are smart, that get it, that recognize their failings and fix those failings. But to help support me when I went over there, I was talked into doing a board game of Cthulhu Conquering the Earth, Cthulhu Wars. So I did a little Kickstarter of this. I thought it would make like $150,000, $200,000, and that would help support me while I was in India. And instead, it boomed up to over $1 million. And I had to contact the Indians and say, hey, you know what? I can't go to India and do game design. I have to manage this Kickstarter. And then that turned into the Petersen Games. But the funny thing is, I thought Cthulhu Wars, the board game, was going to be my very final board game or game I would ever do that I got to design and be behind. Okay. And so I wanted to make it the best ever, my swan song, my final mark on the industry. And so I pulled all the stops, made it as good as I can. It flowed. I was kind of in a bad place when I started, and so I was working really focused on it, and it just flowed like I've never had a game do before. I would almost, if it wasn't about Cthulhu, I'd like give credit to God. Maybe I should anyway, but it really came out easily. Like a friend of mine came to me after we played the first test of it, and he said, how long have you been working on this? And I didn't want to admit it had been like less than a week, so I said a couple months. And he said, it seems really polished. And I was like, huh, so. And this is a hard-nosed lawyer friend of mine who's willing to call me out. So anyway, Cthulhu Wars did really well, and instead of being my swan song, it became like a phoenix and rebirthed me, and now I have Petersen Games, which has recently had trouble, but is rapidly recovering and be back on its feet in no time. And by no time, I mean mid of next week.
Yeah, COVID era, mate, was really hard for a lot of companies. Some games flourished under, but some game companies struggled.
Well, what happened to us is that COVID hit, and COVID hit during Chinese New Year. And for manufacturing, what that means is during Chinese New Year, there's a required holiday, and what everyone does, I mean, this part isn't required, but they do this, they all go to their home province for the holiday, and then they come back. And if you're an unskilled laborer, which most of the guys in the game factory are, you don't necessarily go back to your same factory. You just go get a job anywhere. So basically you have to retrain people after. That's why it's such a big deal, the Chinese New Year in manufacturing. But they all went home, and then COVID lockdown hits. And so none of the companies in China can make any games. So we were like, okay, games are still selling because people want games in COVID. They're still doing well. We'll keep all our team on. We're designing new games, and as soon as COVID restrictions lift in China, we'll start manufacturing more, and then we'll be back in the saddle again. We'll make up for the lost time. And so we sold and sold and sold, and COVID lasted longer than we ever dreamed it would, until we actually ran out of our money and hit a brick wall. And it wasn't because COVID hurt our sales. COVID helped our sales. We just couldn't manufacture new games. And then when COVID did lift, the Chinese companies didn't do games in the order in which they've been contracted. They did it in whatever order was best. Because, of course, why would they, right? They do it in the order that's best for them. So we were not always at the top of the list. And we kind of took it in the shorts. And then the company kind of was on hard times for a few years. And we're finally now recovering from that.
Hopefully tariffs doesn't hit you, because
Well, the tariffs did hit us. So here's the deal. I have a complete game called Hyperspace Standard Edition, which is printed and shrink wrapped and boxed up and all ready to go. And it's sitting in a warehouse in China. And just as we're getting ready to ship it to America, we get 145% tariffs. I was like, so we can't bring it in, right? And I tried to get around it saying, this is a game that it's an American game, right? We did it. It's for an American company, but it was made in China, so it didn't matter. But so recently they said, well, it's only going to be a 30% tariff. And it's going to last at least until mid-August. So we have this window of opportunity where it's only going to cost us, it's going to cost us more, but not 145%. So we have this window of getting it over here and being able to sell it before that slams us.
I hope that works out for you.
Me too. But the game is highly anticipated, so I think it will work out. We have a source for the money, for paying for the 30%, and the game, like I said, the game's paid for, the shipping is paid for. We're ready to go. All we got to do is tell people the Hyperspace is out. Sandy Petersen's asymmetrical strategy board game. Yay! And it's already been propagated because the game's available on like Tabletopia and various online board game things, and it's been reviewed. We sent out 40 preview copies to reviewers, so there's reviews of it and playthroughs, and it's been super well received. It's just like so delayed in coming out that we're embarrassed, but now it's coming.
I was trying to say, isn't it interesting throughout your career you have found yourself in the winds of whatever's happening in the news?
I know, it's bizarre, Call of Cthulhu was pretty seminal. The first horror game. It's still the only one that's as contrarian as it is. And then I go to id Software and got involved in the first game that people played head to head. And in fact, when I went there, I previously worked with Dan Button on his game. Later on, he became Danielle Barry, but at the time he was whatever. And the game was Command HQ. And the intent of this game was that you would go head to head fighting World War II or World War I or World War III or whatever in the game. And what happened is that no one, and he said 65% of people have modems, so they should be willing to play this head to head. But almost no one did. Its sales were like 40,000 copies, which was okay, but not great. And so when I went to id, I said, this is the experience of trying to do an online game. No one plays them online, so we should focus on the single player experience. And they all agreed. We left in the multiplayer experience because we liked doing it. We wanted to have it for us. And then it turns out that's what sold the game. And that was the first game where being online was, and now it's like almost required for any game to have an online aspect to it.
Yeah, especially shooters.
And so I got to be there for that. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, extremely, extremely influential game. Doom and Quake both. Do you keep up with the Doom franchise? I mean, a new game just recently released.
Yeah, Doom Dark Ages. I have not gone out and played it or anything, but I know it's there.
Okay. So I don't know if you've been following any of the criticism or discussion on that. It's okay.
I've heard some of the criticisms, but if I go in and criticize it, then I think that's not fair to the people doing it, because although none of the former crew is at or almost none of the former crew is at the company now, the former Grid Software. But the guys that are there, I know and like. One of them married my neighbor, and so yeah, those guys are cool. They're trying to do the best they can, and they might make mistakes. But the only uh, game I will condemn of the id franchise is Doom 3, which I think is really sucky.
Really?
Yeah, I think it violated the whole idea behind Doom.
That's interesting. You were gone by the time they did Doom 3.
Fucking Doom is about killing scads of monsters, right? You're going through it, there's a million monsters, you're gunning them down. Doom 3 is like you have one huge, beautiful level with one single monster targeting you and walking around and being smart. And that's just not Doom to me. It doesn't seem to have the same impact. But maybe it's because my levels always look crappy, but play fun, and so I'm jealous of someone that can make his levels look fun, but look good, but whatever. That's the one I think is bad.
I don't think I've ever heard someone complain about your levels. I think when I talk to people who are interested in Doom, they say they think your work's pretty good. I don't.
They have a lot of defenders, people like them because they're quirky and I'm always fair. I always give you a hint when I'm about to teleport in a monster on you, or do some other trap. There's always a clue to a secret. There's never a secret that you just have to like in Wolfenstein, you had to bump on every single wall to find the secrets. In Doom, at least on my levels, there's always a hint. There's a texture that's off, or there's a mark, or there's one of the maps that was on the mini map. There was an arrow drawn on the floor on the mini map that pointed towards the secret door. So
you can definitely feel the tabletop influence, and like certain tabletop players, especially dungeon masters, they love it if they can floor the party with a gelatinous ooze pit.
Well, I mean, my signature move in Doom was you walk into a room, it'd be empty, and there was a pedestal, and on top of it was like the BFG or some super awesome thing. And then you look at it, and it's like, I know if I go pick that up, all hell's gonna break loose, literally. But of course, you can't stop yourself. You have to go take it. So that's a very RPG type thing. Look, there's the helmet of infinite wishes on top of that bowl. Why don't you go get it? And they're like, something bad's gonna happen, isn't it?
What was it like working with the Johns, Carmack and Romero? Both of them huge figures, even today.
They are as different from each other as it's possible to imagine. John Carmack is a lot like, maybe he's from Mars. He doesn't have normal human emotions. He reacts to, I mean, he has emotions, but they're here's one story of John Carmack to demonstrate what he was like. Okay. So John Carmack lived in a apartment, and he parked his testosterone, his Ferrari outdoors. Okay. In the parking lot in Texas, where there's hail the size of, ping pong balls. Okay. So this is not where you want to keep your Ferrari. Okay. But that's where he kept it. So a friend of his was out jogging and saw a house for sale. He said, "Hey, John, you should buy this house. Then you'll have a garage to put your car in." And John said, "Okay." And so he basically went to buy the house sight unseen because a friend said he should buy it. I think he probably did see it before he finally signed the deal, but it all started off with him just like, yeah, I should have a house to put my car in. And he did. So it's like, okay.
Very strong mechanical thinker, maybe autism. I don't want to diagnose someone I've never met.
I don't know if I call him autistic or not. Maybe they would call him that now. Or another example, like we were talking once about, we were somewhere and he was trying to order booze, and he pulled out his ID, and it was a Wisconsin driver's license. And we're like, "John, you've been here in Texas for like 3 years. What the heck?" And I said, "Why don't you get a Texas driver's license?" He says, "I don't want to go down to the thing." I said, "Well, what about when you're pulled over?" He says, "Oh, I just paid the fine. I don't care about that." And I wasn't sure if he thought it was a flex that he was paying the fine, but I can't believe it'd be good for him in the long run. But he's like, didn't bother to go get the driver's license because the DMV was sucky. And really, the Texas DMV is not one of the worst DMVs around, but that was kind of a weird attitude, I thought.
Yeah, pretty much known as one of the great genius programmers in gaming.
Yes, super good at math. He hired Michael Abrash for Quake. Michael Abrash is a famous programmer from Microsoft who did a lot of the early seminal work in programming, and he hired him basically to have someone to talk to about programming. And Michael Abrash is a really great guy and got along well. He's not as weird as John Carmack, so like he and I became really good buddies, you know. But but then when Quake finished, he worked on Quake, and then he was excited to do something new. But then it decided it was going to do Quake 2 afterwards, and he didn't want to do the same thing again, and so he left. And I guess John didn't have a buddy then to talk to.
I just such that's it's so the stories around id Software are fascinating. Not really the purview of this interview exactly, but I do recommend people jump into it because besides just the influence of the group, they're just so, like you said, their personalities are very different. Like so much of Doom came out of their weekly tabletop group. I mean, there's so many legends surrounding them.
Yep.
Do you ever follow like some of the fun stuff from Doom, like retroports? You know, there are always retroport challenges for Doom and Quake, especially Quake 3.
You know, I mean, I haven't gone back and done a lot of Doom or Quake. I'm mostly doing whatever I'm working on now, like my current game, Death Dealers, are I'm mostly playing. I'm not like ashamed of or upset over Doom. I'm happy I was on it, you know, but
It's just not your thing.
well, it was my thing for years and years, you know, and it was 30 years ago, and I'm doing something else now.
Like that's what I mean. It's not something that you're doing as like that interests
Yeah,
you.
well, I get this a lot. They say, why don't you go do some more levels for Doom? And I said, I'm sure the guys doing levels for Doom now are far beyond anything I could do. You know, there's been so much experience, and I haven't done a Doom level since 1997, you know, so you know, I'm pretty rusty. I mean, I might have some clever ideas, but I don't feel a need to. And part of it is, I know that by luck or by skill, I don't know what to say, or by God's grace, like I was involved with a very important early role-playing game, Call of Cthulhu. Okay, and that was a huge game-changing thing. And then I was part of Civilization, and then I was part of Doom, the first real first-person shooter. And then I was part of the Age of Empire series, which is one of the basic RTS games of all time. And then I did Cthulhu Wars. So I've got like, so to me, Doom is not this giant pinnacle of the high point in my career. It's one of several high points. You know, it might be the highest in some way, but I'm not sure it is. So it's not like I'm looking back nostalgically to Doom to repeat the glories of Doom, because I
gotcha.
I've got these other games I did too that are just as glorious for me. In fact, lately I've been getting a lot more on X. I've been getting a lot more traction on Age of Empire stuff than Doom stuff. And part of that is because the Doom guys, at least a small group of them, are like pretty negative. And
shooter guys are negative. What?
Yeah.
Breaking news.
But the Age of Empire guys are mostly like, yay, or they might complain that I ruined the Koreans or something, but they're not as bitchy about it, you know. So
I 100% know what you mean. Yeah, I'm terrible at FPS games, like in general. That is not a good crowd to be around if you're bad at those.
Well, I wasn't the greatest at them either at id. I mean, I was better then than I am now. But when we get in firefights, like you know, John Romero is the one that always got the most kills, right? And he was the top guy, and then the rest of us would be, you know, feasting off his leavings. And he was really cunning about getting it. It showed to me like he was more evil than any computer opponent could ever be.
That's cool. Okay, so I wanted to hear. We got about 30 minutes left. I'm going to talk Lovecraft because I love H.P. Lovecraft. I did a reread of all his stuff last year. So let's do it. What's your favorite Lovecraft story?
Probably the first one I read, Pickman's Model. I like that one a lot. But I'm not saying it's the best. It's just the first one I read. So, because I was a kid, 8 years old, and I sit down, I want to read this thing. So I'm looking for the shortest story because I have attention span of an 8-year-old. And then I read this, and it's all in first person. And at the end, you find out there's really cool, and this like shocking thing. I'd never read anything like this. And I had read already at that age Poe and liked it. But the Lovecraft was just something new. And then I finally got into reading the whole thing, and I read the Dunwich Horror and Call of Cthulhu and the Shadow of Innsmouth and all this stuff. And there's like a whole town full of monsters. And there's this cult that's all over the world that turns out to be this giant monster at the end that you didn't have any idea. And all this stuff. I mean, I read the story of the Call of Cthulhu without knowing what a Cthulhu was. And that's probably very difficult to have happen to you today. People go into it knowing who Cthulhu is. I had no idea how big it was. I mean, in the story, the statue of Cthulhu was 9 inches tall that they worship. So you have no idea what his size is until he shows up.
I didn't realize that.
But so I'm reading this and it's like this mystery that's going through there, like, because we know about mythologies, like the Greeks had a mythology, the Norse had a mythology, but you don't have Odin showing up in Norway. You don't have people worshiping Odin in Canada, right? It doesn't make sense. But here's this cult, there's people worshiping this Cthulhu thing spelled different ways in the South Seas, in Louisiana, in the Alaska, and like, what's up? How is that even possible? Then there's the dreams that are going across the world. It's like this amazing mystery being unveiled. And then the final climax, when it gets loose and you realize that the climax is a little weakened today because the idea behind it was that this is the thing that will destroy the world. And since that time, we invented nukes. So we're all more comfortable with the idea of something that will destroy the world than people were then. But it's still pretty great, and it's still the idea that Earth has a poison pill and his name is Cthulhu is pretty cool. So I like that a lot. And the book I had, so I wasn't able to find other Lovecraft books for a long time. I only had that one book with its stories. When I was 14, I found out that BYU Library had had books by Lovecraft. So I'd go check them out. And I was the only guy that ever checked them out. I could tell because you look on the card in the back of the book. And I would check them out every few weeks and see them. And then when I went to high school, BYU found out that these were rare first editions and they were valuable. So they locked them so like teenagers couldn't get them anymore. So, I can't blame them, but.
So you were reading first editions?
Yeah, first editions from Arkham House.
That's amazing.
So that's what I was reading. It's a 14-year-old kid taking these home and reading them. So then in 1917, when I was 17, my dad takes me on a trip to New York. He was doing some medical convention, and he said, "Amuse yourself while I'm at the convention." So I'd walk up and down the street, and I found this bookstore. So I go into the bookstore, and in the bookstore, there's Lovecraft books because Ballantine had just released a paperback edition of all Lovecraft stuff. So I like bummed money from my dad to buy him, and then I spent my awesome vacation in New York sitting in a windowless hotel room reading Lovecraft.
Sounds fun.
And that was my first breakthrough to Lovecraft. And then when I did Call of Cthulhu the game, the money from that, we were still paying royalties to Arkham House at the time under the apprehension that they owned the license. It is now public domain. Whether they ever owned the license or not is not clear, but then we thought they did. They got the money and they used it to reprint all the Lovecraft books with the S.T. Yoshi editions, which are the best edition. So I also helped make Lovecraft to have a good edition.
Nice.
Yay.
What would be my favorite story? Shadow Out of Time. I like Shadow Out of Time.
That's a good one. There's a lot of background in that story, A lot of people will say it's the Color Out of Space, which is also a very cinematic. In a sense, it's cinematic. It's a great thing to see, except how can you make a color that no one can see? Not that you can't see, but like no one's ever seen before. So different movies, like Nick Cage said, we'll make it lavender, And then there's a movie by Ha Jin called Die Farbe from Germany. And he's a Vietnamese immigrant to Germany, and he made a Color Out of Space movie. And his approach was that he had to be black and white, and then the color was colored.
Well, that's clever, actually.
That was kind of clever. And then recently, so this is a fun fact, I discovered that some scientists in England had discovered a way to let people see a new color we'd never seen before.
I did read that, yes.
Yeah. I'm like, that's so cool, a new color we'd never seen. So I guess it's possible to have a new color. And the thing about the Color Out of Space was like, it's not radiation, it's not a gas, it's not a plasma or a spirit, it's literally a color. How do you fight a color or communicate with it? And if you get tinged by the color, then it feeds on you. It's just so alien. I don't know any other book that's ever had anything as alien as that, an intelligent color. That's Lovecraft.
Another great one, Evil Clergyman. I like the weird HP stuff.
That's like his last thing he did. That was cool though.
I like the weird stuff. I think that's
Sure, but there's a short of it like 30-40 minutes long with Jeffrey Combs as the evil clergyman.
I did not know that.
Well, now you can look it up.
You're up to date on all the adaptations.
Well, I really, really liked Reanimator and the other movie versions. And now there's actually, because when I was growing up, there was Lovecraft movies. There was The Haunted Palace. Though it's named after Poe, it's actually the case of Charles Dexter Ward, with Vincent Price playing Ward. And then there was the movie Die Monster Die with Boris Karloff, which is based on The Color Out of Space. Though in that case, instead of being a color, it's like uranium, Then there was the Dunwich Horror, in which they had kind of a rock and hippie guy play Wilbur Whateley.
Yeah.
And there was The Shunned House with Oliver Reed, in which they replaced the hideous monster in the attic. It's actually an August Lust story, but they replaced it with basically a Jane Eyre story where it was a crazy woman. But all these movies were not great, And so when Reanimator, that was the first Lovecraft movie that was actually good. And then From Beyond, and that was another good one. And then Dagon. And now you could argue about the greatness of Nick Cage's Color Out of Space, but it's head and shoulders above what we had in the 60s. So,
Okay.
And plus, Nick Cage's tendency to overact actually makes a lot of sense if you own a farm that's being invaded by a monster from a meteor.
True. That would freak me out. Yeah, a little bit. Shadow over Innsmouth, that one has been adapted a bunch. I see.
A whole town. Yeah, that was Dagon. The film version of that was Dagon, and by Brian Nesna, and it was really good. It was actually very close to the book, except they put it in Spain. But so, like in the middle of the story, you may recall he's in his room and he can hear them coming to get him. So he actually goes and takes the lock from the bathroom and unscrews it and puts it on the door to lock it. So he has a lock on the door to keep him out. And then he has to go into the room next to him and go out the window and all that's in the movie. The biggest change. Have you seen Dagon?
Yes, I have.
Okay. The biggest change they have in it is that the monsters are based on tentacles instead of fish frogs. I think fish frogs are harder to make scary with prosthetics, so they went for tentacles. But they also the little things like second time through, I noticed that no one in Innsmouth, in Boca, ever blinks ever. None of them blink. And it took me the second time through to realize that. And the other thing is that whenever you're in Mboka, it's always drizzling or raining. It's never clear. So those are little things I didn't pick up the first time, but I'm sure they affected me subconsciously. So those are kind of cool.
That is cool. I had so many things I could ask. What do you Lovecraft died kind of young-ish.
He did young, 47.
He was already kind of moving away from some of his previous mythos. What do you think might have happened if he had lived?
Well, he was moving towards science fiction, and he was doing the Mountains of Madness and Shadow Over Time. I think he was like if you go back to Dunwich Horror, and it's very much occult. There's like magic spells and stuff, and you don't see that anymore in the Shadow on a Time, or the Mountains of Madness. It's all science there. There's aliens and they are on Earth and they're the horror. And so I think he did move and evolve, and I would love to see what he would have done later on. But I also wish he'd written more just when he was alive, because he wrote probably 750,000, 500,000 words of letters to other authors. And he could have been writing more things. On the other hand, Lovecraft was super seminal, not just because of his writing, but he was very active in the Amateur Press Association. It was the equivalent of, group Reddit of the time. And he inculcated other authors. He got them along. He'd share ideas with Robert E. Howard from Conan, Clark Ashton Smith. He basically brought Robert Bloch up from a teenage boy to being a great horror writer. He was the first guy to get up the idea of a shared universe. So he would say, yeah, use Cthulhu, use the Necronomicon, put these in your stories. And when I was reading these as a kid, I'd read a story from some other guy and they'd be like, the Necronomicon, is it real? It gave it an eerie feeling of maybe it was a real thing. And no one had done that before. Now it's not uncommon, but back then that was quite a big deal. So he's nurturing other writers. He's doing the shared universe thing. He's basing his monsters on science, and he has a completely different approach to horror, which is in a typical horror story. What you have is you're in the regular world, okay, and then there's an intrusion, something bad, a serial killer, a ghost, something bad, and then it does something terrible, and then you go back to the regular world and it's over. But in Lovecraft stories, you're in the regular world, and then there's the intrusion, and then you realize that there was no regular world. The intrusion is the real way the universe works, and then at the end, you can't ever go back. Into Call of Cthulhu, you can't go back to the world where humans matter, because at any moment, Cthulhu is going to wake up and wipe us out. You're just stuck. And another feature that Lovecraft did that a lot of people don't get, but it still works, which is that when you're reading a crazy horror story with monsters from outer space, there's always the disbelief. Like, obviously, this is bogus, right? We all have that in the back of our mind. So we have to work to overcome the suspension of disbelief, right? And some authors try to get you to overcome it by arguing, well, no, it's werewolves could be real, and we're like, yeah, right, whatever, keep reading. But what Lovecraft did was he had his heroes disbelieve, which is usually first person, disbelieve in the monster and argue against it. Okay, and their arguments against it get more and more stupid as they go on, because it starts being really obvious that there's actually something terrible going on, and the hero just won't. He's just blinded to it. So what happens, instead of you having disbelief, you find yourself arguing in favor of the monsters against the hero mentally, and you're bought into the monsters being there. Okay, and that's why the end of his stories, there's often like the proof there was really a monster, which some people think, is this like an O. Henry ending? It doesn't seem very effective. That's not what it is. So at the end of the Whisperer in Darkness, for example, he finds the face and hands of Henry Akeley, which prove that the thing he was talking to during the story was an alien in a chair covered up, right? And so, but you, the viewer, are fully aware it was a monster. But this is the proof to the hero, to prove to him it was real, so he knows the awesome horror. So it's not a big reveal. He does have those reveals, like in The Outsider and a few other stories, but it's the proof that it was that was there. But basically Lovecraft solved the whole suspension of disbelief thing, because you read a Lovecraft story, you're not arguing that it's fake. You're arguing against the guy not believing it, because he's obviously wrong, and that was really clever.
I was just going to say, there is an adaptation of Call of Cthulhu.
Yes. Yeah, there's been a couple video games of Call of Cthulhu. I think this one is actually licensed. And I haven't played it. I've heard mixed reviews. Some people like it, some people don't. So I was like, well, I guess if it was really loved, I'd be sure to play it. But as it is, I'm happy playing my board games of Lovecraft.
How do I describe it? It's really good, just not as a game. Like the gamey elements of it are just underbaked.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
It's a game that you really want to like, but, don't. There's movies like that too. You watch a movie, man, I want to like this so much, and I just can't.
As a HP immersive simulator, it works very well.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's a pretty game too. It's a nice looking game.
Well, I'm always in favor of games that look nice. I think the art really helps. I mean, Cthulhu Wars has these giant figures, I mean, people are calling them bigatures instead of miniatures. And it's one of the reasons the game costs so much. You could argue, well, you could get by with a smaller counter. I probably could, but the effect of slamming this down on the tabletop when you summon Cthulhu is so visceral and effective that I've asked players about it. Should I make everything smaller or make it cheaper? No, we like the giant Cthulhu. And one of the reasons that the giant, well, he's still not the right size. I made all the figures 28mm scale, so you could use them in Call of Cthulhu, the board game, or in D&D. Except Cthulhu is still not big enough, because I worked out how big Cthulhu is, to scale with a human based on the size of the monster as described in the story of the Call of Cthulhu. And it turns out that monster is the same size in the relationship to a human that you are to a 28mm figure, which is really useful for gaming.
That's a very big miniature.
So I couldn't make a miniature that was 6 feet tall.
You just bring in a statue. Here it is, guys.
but the thing is, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu or even D&D and you say Cthulhu has appeared, then you pull out your miniature figure and say, okay, so if this is you, I'd be Cthulhu in comparison to size. So go ahead and shoot me all you want, because your bullets are going to penetrate into me like half an inch, and then I regenerate. So who cares? But it makes Cthulhu, it kind of puts it to scale. And then, of course, there's the theory that the monster that they see at the end of Call of Cthulhu isn't Cthulhu, that it's just one of his star spawn. Because we have no evidence to say it's Cthulhu. I mean, Johansson, who sees it, doesn't even know the word Cthulhu. And then the guy writing the story, okay, he says it's Cthulhu, but he didn't see it. He wasn't there. You know, if he had seen it, who'd know? It could have just been the star spawn. And it was on the highest peak of world, yeah, so that's an indicator maybe it was Cthulhu. But you could also imagine that the door might open and one of the star spawn come out before Cthulhu himself. Who knows? So anyway, that's one of the fan theories about Cthulhu, that monster is not Cthulhu.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
But it's on the same species. That's the thing they always forget. They think Cthulhu is a giant monster that kills everyone. Cthulhu is the high priest of the star spawn, which there's millions of them sleeping along with him. So it's not just him coming to destroy the world. It's millions of things that are also huge, maybe not as big as him, but, you know, supernatural monsters that have knowledge of all science is, you know, a problem if there's millions of them. Even if there's only one, it's a problem. So when they talk about Cthulhu versus Godzilla, I actually did an article, a video on that on my YouTube channel, what would happen. And I didn't give it up for, I like, Godzilla has a weapon I think would affect Cthulhu. That atomic breath is not to sneeze at. But I said, but the problem is that Cthulhu has psychic powers, and he has a million other followers, and we know that Godzilla is subject to mental control from many movies. So it might be a matter of Cthulhu plus Godzilla. Right.
But Godzilla, he'd bring in all his monster friends. He'd bring in the Moth guy. I'm not.
Well, I'm pretty sure Cthulhu can handle Mothra, you know. But Godzilla might be tougher. I'm sure Cthulhu can beat Mothra. Anyway, so that was my inner geek. I had to do a logical Cthulhu versus Godzilla, you know, because that's what I am. So
that's fun. Are you pretty happy with the legacy of HP these days? It's definitely more positive than negative.
All the kitschy, stupid Cthulhu stuff, like Cthulhu racing games and Cthulhu things, it's kind of dumb in a sense, but it's not really my fault. In my games, although I laugh about Cthulhu, I try to, like Cthulhu Wars, I all through the book it's played straight. Cthulhu is a terrible monster destroying the world. But when people play in it, they're laughing, they're joking, they're having a good time. Call of Cthulhu is all played straight. It's this creepy monster stuff, but people playing it are having a great time. So I think it's better and funner and more funny even if the source material that we're using plays it straight, and then the players are the ones that make the fun, you know. But so maybe I don't always appreciate the like chibi Cthulhus. Right, because the thing is, that's what everyone does. They say, oh, what if I made a Cthulhu but he's cute? That's original. Well, that's what everyone does, you know, to be cute with Cthulhu. And sure, go ahead and do it, but don't forget that the original Cthulhu was actually not very funny in the story. He's really nasty.
Yeah, not a lot of humor in the HP stories.
There is not, though he did have a sense of humor, and it shows through here and there. And he actually wrote humorous things, and they're not very funny. They're like super lame. Just like when Poe tried to write humor, he wrote like "Never Bet the Devil Your Head," and yeah, it's humor, but it's ha ha ha, you know. But on the other hand, just like for example, you've read The Shadow Out of Time, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is absolutely hilarious that Lovecraft doesn't have the Ithians take over humanity. Like, we're not cool enough. He skips us and goes to beetles, you know. When they move to get away from the flying polyps, they say, we'll take over the beetles. That's a way cooler race than humans. I'm like, you'd rather be bugs than humans. I think that's a really snide look at Lovecraft's opinion of humanity, that he would do that. But he doesn't joke about it in the story. That's how it is, you know. But I think it's funny. Or the line in the famously racist Lovecraft in the story The Mountains of Madness, where he says, star-headed polyps from an alien planet, whatever they were men. So he's like giving credit to these alien monsters for being like, it's like, well, so much for the big racism thing. I mean, yeah, he had still had racist stuff, but the important thing is that he was less racist over time, which is the direction that we want racists to go, you know. And also, it's always my opinion, with Future Forgotten, I think racism is a flaw of education, not like a crime. We have to, the correction to it isn't punishment, but teaching them, you know. And Lovecraft seemed to be slowly learning that.
Yeah, he also had terrible mental illness. I mean, poor guy. It's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, his whole life was a nightmare. So
it's really sad. If you don't know the background of H.P. Lovecraft, there's a few pretty good documentaries. There's like at least one or two of them on YouTube that goes into it. He had a...
Oh, I know his background pretty well, as you'd imagine.
Well, this has been really fun, Sandy. I major respect for your work. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Like I said, send us the link. If you can, promote Sandy of Cthulhu on Patreon. One word, spelled Cthulhu correctly, and people can log in and get my stuff. I'm not expensive. I price myself less than Patreon and Grok said I should price it to make it more accessible, because, you know, I like people. And I'm happy to have been here with you, and maybe we'll do this again someday.
That'd be cool. It's an honor, Sandy. Thank you so much. Well, guys, I think that will do it for us today. Thank you so much, Sandy, for coming on the show and speaking with me. That was really cool. Big fan of his work, so sharing that with all of you was pretty neat. Of course, this show isn't possible without the help of my friend, Chris Holowicki, my editor, who makes me look way more competent than I actually am. And of course, all of you, my friends, my audience, your support means everything. And so, until next time, guys, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang! If you are a fan of CultureScape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can! By joining the CultureScape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor Chris as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love CultureScape, then come join us today on Patreon.